David, thanks so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I also really wanted to thank you for turning me on to the Junto Club from Ben Franklin.
Isn't that interesting?
You know, I love history, and I had not heard about it. And for those that haven't heard about it, David turned me on to it. It was Ben Franklin had a small group of individuals with a diverse set of backgrounds and experiences that met on a regular basis to exchange ideas. You know, David, I thought a great way to start was they asked a set of questions. I would like to start with question number one of the Junto Club.
Okay.
Which is, I wonder if I should change my affect in reading this, but I won't. Have you met with anything an author you last read, remarkable or suitable, to be communicated to the Junto?
Yes, absolutely. I am totally a beast around a book called Social Physics, How Ideas Flow. And it has changed my life in that I've learned all about how to run a meeting from this guy who's been studying it named Sandy Pentland, who has been exploring the digitization of humans who work online, and he's following the face-to-face methods. He is creating. He says, how do you create serendipity online? And how do you sort of figure out what the flow would be? He talks about when you run a meeting, the leader should not say anything. And that the whole idea of a meeting is to be a coach and let other people talk. And then once you have your initial meeting, everyone goes out and explores and brings new stuff back in. If there's no exploration in a meeting, then you don't get to the next level. So it's really interesting how he has a whole idea of how do ideas flow. Have you ever thought of that? How ideas flow. I mean, you're in the business of figuring that out, and there's a serendipity effect that you can't necessarily digitize, but you can certainly give people hints on how to do it. So that's the number one thing that I love from the Thomas Jefferson thing, and I think that what he is saying to you in that first question is exactly what Alex Pentland is saying: is that it's not about being in a meeting and being sort of sitting there. It's taking what you learned in a meeting, going out, exploring, and bringing it back to the meeting. And that the whole.
I fear that we're going to inflate the egos of physicists, which already think that everything is physics, no matter what.
Yeah, probably. But I've never heard the term social physics before in this way.
Yeah,
and it really I use it for meeting design. I use it for whenever I do my sales meetings with my teams. I basically turn it into a coaching session. And everyone, instead of saying, hey, you didn't reach sales, we're down 22% or whatever, it's here's the client and group, how do we solve the problem to help this guy explore other options to create more business for your company. And I thought
it could be so hard to sit back. It could be so, one of my resolutions this year is, and I've done it with my team, where I'll actually start a timer on my phone, almost like a free diver, where I'm trying to build up my tolerance to be able to stay quiet for longer and longer. There's an author, Liz Weissman. She wrote a book called Multipliers, and she has this concept of there's these 6 accidental diminishing qualities that we have, and one of mine is the idea guy, where you assume that if you just step in there and you throw out a big idea, then that'll get the momentum going. But when you find is it actually shuts some people up, or they they get attached to your idea rather than throwing out their own ideas.
Oh yeah, I was for a few years I was a consultant to the State Department, and I went to the farewell we did for Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of the State at the time. And she started saying that whenever she walks into a room and gives these big ideas, she get all her staff are eye rollers. And so she decided she can't do that because it's like, oh no, what is she going to come up with now? And the staff goes, and that they're not receiving it, they're not hearing it. So it's got to be a different way of doing it, I think. And
they're not owning it. But yeah, that concept of social physics and I've read I forget the name of the book, but it's also talking about the spreading of ideas in the same way that viruses spread, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and the moods spread the same way that viruses do in a digital medium.
Well, we're hiring our epidemiologists for the event industry.
Interesting.
Who has now predicted that the virus is going to sort of fall apart in February and March. Even before Omicron, and he said that he put in some things in there. He is actually doing maps on idea flow, and how an idea moves around the country just like a virus. And it's fascinating to think about it as in the same exact way. And the virus health guys are the ones that are helping us create these maps for idea flow and how an idea travels around the country. It's totally interesting.
It's interesting. It's almost, I wonder if people who organize events and meetings and collaboration, if there's a bit to be learned from the intelligence community and propaganda departments that are out there, right? Because they know about planting ideas.
Oh, they certainly do. Well, I think that a lot of, a lot of this is information disease that we end up practicing because we don't have all the information. And the intelligence people know that we're handicapped and know how to use the tools appropriately. I mean, it's all about propaganda. I was at this company called Primedia. No, I was at a company called Michelin, and the head of one of the aides to the CEO comes over and says, that was really good. That's the way like the Nazis did it, which was not a compliment, but it was like, they were so good at their propaganda. It was like a totally laughing at a compliment in a bad way. But it is, these things can be used for good purposes or you can be used for bad purposes. And it's just a tool.
And there's great frameworks and so much knowledge out there. I find a lot of times when you're facilitating groups or collaborations, a lot of it you feel like you're just kind of figuring out on the spot. And I got excited when you said that you're writing a practical playbook to collaboration or the collaboration artists, which is even more interesting. I'm curious, what was the genesis of that?
Well, the genesis was I've been doing this damn event business for 20 years. And everyone has these beautiful sceneries and these great sets, and the food is unbelievable, but it all falls apart at the facilitation mode. That they don't get the girls to dance with the boys at the junior high school dance. And so I realized that it's sort of like selling the razor without a good razor blade. And so that the missing link is what I'm calling the collaboration artist. And the collaboration artist could be the conductor of an orchestra, the leader of creating an event. It could be the guy that works the whiteboard. It could be the people that are opening a project for a company and they want to get everyone to work together. It could be a campaign manager. But you've got to be a collaboration artist. And there are simple tools like listening to other people and things like that that actually work. And they're not that far-fetched. And so I think that the idea that my goal in writing this book on how to be a collaboration artist is to celebritize the collaboration artist. I've also started another organization called Collaborate America, where we honor 6 collaboration artists a year, because I think that I'm using the model that in the 70s and 60s, the chefs that were behind the scenes were cooks. Now they're superstars. The person that puts on the new climate conference is a superstar, and they should be celebrated and not be pushed behind the scenes. So I think that that's the next level of celebrity, and I want to sort of show that. I also want to prove the point that everybody can be a collaboration artist and that they should be teaching collaboration arts in elementary school to let people know how to work together better. It just seems so obvious to me after watching the event industry for 20 years fail at a lot of their gatherings, because there's no real outcome, there's no real agenda, there's no way that they get people to talk to each other. One of the things I do at all of my speeches, when I go give a speech now, I go on stage and I say, okay, it's not about me. I want to create thousands of conversations right here in front of you. And so I just have people talk to each other before I talk and have them say, what can we do? Introduce them to each other and say, an event now is no longer about how many people attend an event, but how many conversations you're able to create at an event. And those interactions convert down into actions that people, like activities, from getting married to new businesses to one-night stands to you never know what. And so I believe that that's part of being a collaboration artist, is to activate the audience as opposed to just letting them listen like they did for thousands and thousands of years without any feedback whatsoever. So that's one of the simple things, I think, from a collaboration artistry perspective. And it's sort of what happens online too, sometimes. The one thing, I'm not taking any political stance here at all, But when you think about the genius of the Trump rallies, which get into a little bit of propaganda, they did things like he always would come in late, so people would talk to each other naturally. He talked to people like he was their neighbor, as opposed to somebody who's highfalutin in a sense, and that didn't activate that crowd. So you can sort of see the reason that he was successful in the beginning, anyway, in terms of some of those techniques, and they were propaganda techniques too, but they also could be used for good or for bad.
Yeah, getting these collaboration artists out of the shadows and up on a pedestal. I hope what will happen, because you talked about chefs, when you started putting the glass walls into the kitchens or putting the kitchens in the middle of the restaurant, all of a sudden people realize, wow, this small restaurant has an incredible amount of people in that kitchen.
Yeah.
It was always underestimated what it
Yes.
took to create that experience. And I think it's the same with these collaboration artists. You underestimate how much is needed. And I think a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this in the past, if you're putting something together, small, medium, large, there's even this question of, do we need a facilitator? Can we just do this ourselves? Do we really, is that an expense? But I think if you get them up on a pedestal and really, put it out in the air, how complicated this is and how important it is, then it becomes a little easier to invest the right amount of money into these.
It's no different than doing your own systems. When you guys, for example, go in and recreate the way a company operates, it's very equivalent to the chef and the cooks and the sous chefs and the dishwashers and all those things. There's so much involved in it, and people underestimate. They think, I think that the purpose of technology is to make what was complex trivial, and that's what happens when you are a good collaboration artist. When you have a project in mind or a solution, all of a sudden the answer is so obvious after you haven't solved it for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden a solution happens, and oh my God, it always should work like this. I mean, it's like an aha moment in a sense.
That's it's when the magic happens. And I know that you've had a ton of experience in the Culinary Institute, or industry. What I think that the business world has so much to learn from restaurants, especially if you look at 3 Michelin star restaurants. It's operational excellence all the time, not just some of the time, not just most of the time, all of the time. But then that is held in concert with just top-notch creativity and artistry all at the same time. And, I wonder if you've been exploring that topic. What can we take from that industry into business?
Well, one of the things I do, I have this really sort of fun, I guess it's a hobby, but it's an expensive hobby, is I go to a lot of Michelin star restaurants and I take pictures of what they're doing at the tasting restaurants and use it in all my speeches, because all of a sudden you realize the future of the creativity of the event industry and the hospitality industry is what these Michelin star restaurants are exploring. And you see it, you see new systems happening, new combinations of things that don't necessarily go together that all of a sudden taste fantastic. And it's no different than creating a menu in your office or a system or something like that. I mean, you guys do the same thing. You take two things that you wouldn't think go together, and they really do go together. And you make it fresh, and you keep it at the highest quality of operational excellence, as you said. And I've learned so much. And what it does from a social physics point of view, it's that exploration that I can bring to something else. So what happens is, half the time when I go to an event and I show people what they're doing at a great tasting restaurant, it inspires them to think of what they can do in their own place to make it better. And so, that whole idea of the exploration is not internal. It's not just external, it's internal. It's like, oh my God, what can I do? It's like what the brilliance of competition. I had this magazine for 20 years. I still have it with this new company. And I always use the whole premise of my whole company was allowing people to peek over the fence to see what other people are doing. Because most people are so locked into their own world that they don't even realize. I realized that after I worked for a corporation for 10 years and started my own company, that, oh my God, you don't have to do everything using like the greatest, most expensive way of doing it. The new technology today is making it, sorry, somebody's at my door. That's the problem of working it from home.
It's the times we're in.
Shut up, Armandi. Hey. When the postman comes, he barks.
Love it.
It's one of the problems of home working, I guess.
We're all in it now.
Yeah, we're all
and
in it now.
What I loved what you said about inspiration and bringing inspiration for people to connect that within their own lives. I mean, that's artistry, right? It's not necessarily what the artist meant, but it's what does this mean to you, and what are you going to take with this art? And I'm curious, outside of maybe in addition to inspiration, what are the when you think about a really superstar collaboration artist, what are the qualities or what are the most important features that collaboration artist has?
Well, first of all, he understands process and he understands listening, and he's able to think on his feet. So he can then inspire somebody by his words. If he calls somebody out, he's thinking on his feet literally all the time. And it's no different than what a great lawyer does, and you know how to like cross-examine a witness, and you're thinking on your feet to relate to the person that you're dealing with right in front of you, as opposed to a grand plan. So you're taking all this theory and bringing it down to the person that you're listening to. You always watch Bill Clinton, for example. When you talk to a Bill Clinton and he's with you, you're like the only person in the room. A great facilitator has to be able to do that to an entire room and to an individual. Because they want to feel it. I mean, it all still comes down to the Maya Angelou quote that people don't remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel. And whether it's customer service on a computer system or it's the interface, if it feels good or it feels good. The same when you're a collaboration artist, you have to make people feel like they're being heard. One of the techniques that I use a lot is something called the Jeffersonian style dinner party. I think we may have mentioned it before. And one of the things I use is an opening question, because basically the way a Jeffersonian dinner party works is they bring 12 to 15 people in a room, and the leader facilitates the entire conversation. So instead of having lots of like individual conversations, let's have dinner and everybody talks, and you never know who's going to talk to anyone else. And sometimes the person at your left never talks to the person at the end of the table. So what the facilitator does is allows people to have a group conversation. It's kind of like going to school a little bit. And the questions that you start with sort of a question that brings the conversation down to what it was like before you were 20 years old, because it democratizes a room. So I always use the first question. There's two questions I like. And they're not highfalutin at all, is what was your first job and what did you learn from it? And so the guy that was the ice cream scooper at Baskin-Robbins, learns customer service because, he knows how people complain and how sticky everything gets and all that. The other question is, who was your favorite teacher and why? And it always comes down to the third person that speaks says, my favorite teacher was my third grade teacher because she or he listened to me as a real life human being and heard me. And that seems to be a common thread. And then that goes around the room and everyone's sort of agreeing with that. And it gets, it gets to be almost a therapy session in some ways, in a good way. And it gets inspiring for people. Then you take the question from that before you're 20 and you keep elevating it and keep getting it larger to solve your bigger problem once people get to know each other. Because you take that experience that, I worked on a farm and I as a kid and I, milk cows. And then somehow the solution about the persistence of milking cows properly gets into the solution for the bigger problem that you're trying to solve. It's just amazing how we're the through lines go through human, it's like very human as opposed to very technical.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer that it's such a low bar for just people listening to you as a human being. You would hope that it would be more commonplace, but it's not.
People do not connect with each other, and people are not facilitating that. They think that it could just happen, but it doesn't.
It's a shame, and technology is supposed to help us. And it can sometimes get in the way. But you know what? I think I might actually steal some of the Jeffersonian dinner party concepts for, we've been remote for 20 years or so at this point, and we'll do these things like virtual happy hours. And sometimes it's not that smooth because in a happy hour, you do have a bunch of one-off conversations. But when you're all on Zoom, you're kind of just all on stage watching two people have a one-off conversation and then switch over to another one-off conversation. But if it was more orchestrated like that, you can almost make a Zoom kind of get together a little bit more meaningful in that way?
Oh, I think the ones that I've been to that really work the best are both the group ones and then the Zooms that go into individual matching people up and forcing them to have a conversation like with 3 people. You can't hide, and you give them a little of a guidepost of how to have that conversation. And I think it's fantastic because I think we have a lot of Zoom fatigue going on too. And
big time.
And so
I've found something shocking. I've started playing around with VR, virtual reality meetings, just to play around with it. And what I found shocking, or a surprise at least, pleasantly, is the 3D audio, the spatial audio that you experience in there. Is if someone's kind of speaking directly into your ear, you feel it there. Or if they're at the other end of the room, kind of having a side conversation, whispering, you hear that in the distance. And there's something really grounding about that, that you can replicate something in the real world in this virtual space.
You know what's interesting also about that? You bring that up. We were experimenting with, we were using these headphones that you use for those silent discos in our education sessions. And it turns out that you learn more because you're hearing it more clearly. And you also don't need the heavy walls in between. So event organizers save a ton of money on having to create rooms when they can actually just have people listening through headsets in multiple rooms at the same time without any walls. And that's kind of interesting. But I do believe that the virtual thing is going to be here to stay. And that, one of the things that we've discovered was that a face-to-face event is a trust accelerator. So once you meet someone in person once, you can then do a lot of more virtual stuff. What's going to happen, I think, is as the new tools happen, that virtual becomes really like what you were saying, where more intimate and more trusting things happen. They're going to learn to trust online a little bit more, I think, and you have more of the avatars and things like that, like the metaverse thing with Horizon workspaces. I've been experimenting with a little bit. It's still clunky and it's like a headache wearing it, but I think that we're sort of in the brick phone age of that era.
Yeah, it's an inflection point. It's going to take a while, and it's not like we're all going to be having VR meetings anytime soon. But it's a nice thing to experiment with, and there'll definitely be some meaningful. I could even see from a therapy perspective and learning.
Oh yeah,
just so much.
Oh yeah, there's all these techniques. Like I used to go to this conference called C2 Montreal. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a great creative conference in Montreal that they have once a year. We put it down as one of our number one at BizBash, one of our number one events of the year always. And they experiment a lot with how people behave in situations and how they have meetings. Like they did one year, they took like 12 people and they elevated them into the sky, so your feet were dangling. So you have a meeting and you're more vulnerable, and the ideas are more interesting. Then they had a meeting in a room that was all mirrored and dark so that you can discuss difficult topics. I mean, they experiment with the way people sit and communicate. They did another experiment where people would take a walk with a neighbor in a rainforest with an umbrella. So they created this rainforest, and you had to walk around a path in the rain talking to people, to one person. So it's just interesting how we're all studying the new ways of connecting, and it's coming down to the old ways of connecting.
It is, and it's so much in the event industry, and I will admit, for a long time I underestimated what goes on in that industry, and what I found is in the last 5 years or so, I now have a lot more people in my network and in my orbit that are in that industry. And you had mentioned that we're in the golden age of events. I'm just curious, what is this confluence of things that's happening?
Well, what's happening is everyone is saying, they're going to these big conferences, and they're saying, I could do this a lot better. They're saying, maybe
the critic in all of us.
The critic in all, and a lot of these people in these big companies are saying, I could create a better version of a CES, or I can create a better version of a niche, because things are getting smaller too, and people want to connect more, and people want experiences. But so the big organizers are now branching out into creating smaller events, but face-to-face events are going to be more of a luxury, because you can easily do the Zoom meeting for things that don't really matter as much. But when you really want to practice, hugging your customers or your employees, a great event or a great trade show will be the way to do it. And I think you're going to see people spending more money on that. Already, people go to conferences like World Economic Forum and TED, and they're spending a lot of money to go because they want that network. It's no longer now about the content as much as the contact. So you get to meet people that you wouldn't normally meet, which is why people like the event industry. That's why the hallway is more important sometimes than the main stage. And that the serendipity effect is kind of where people, people would say, oh, that nice party planner. It's not really about parties. It's very much about strategic gatherings.
And community.
Yeah, community.
Right? Like, that's been one of the threads in some of my other conversations is, there used to be a lot of, your Elks Lodges, your bowling leagues. Like, there were all these community features that they've kind of dwindled and gone away. And I don't know if this is an accurate kind of view, but it feels like we kind of stepped away from that kind of community for a little bit. But now it's this return to it's important for a community, and we have a hunger, that we're missing it. We didn't realize we missed it, but now we are, and we have a hunger for it.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to some of my millennial friends, and they were saying the reason they go to events is they can scale relationships. Because instead of meeting one person for dinner, they can meet 50 people. If they do it right, they can get to know an entire industry. So it's a very strategic thing too, that for them to be part of their community in some way. And it's not necessarily just to be a number or a widget in the community. It's to be some sort of to break through in many cases, and people notice.
I like that. Well, David, I've really enjoyed this conversation. One thing I always love to finish on is what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received yourself in life or work?
Okay, this is the best piece of advice I got. I had a boss at a company called Prime Media. We owned like 350 magazines. And he would tell me, how do you sort of prevent conflicts from happening right away? He said, whenever someone comes into my office and presents an idea, I always say yes. And then I ask, well, let's see some more information about that. He says that 99% of the time, no one follows up on anything they say they're going to do. So why start a fight right away? And you can always say no later. And so it also makes you more likable by everybody, because you're not saying that idea is terrible. You're sort of saying, tell me more about it. And if they have a lot of passion for the idea, you'll see it. But if they don't, it goes away pretty quickly. So it's like one way that made me. It's part of the whole concept of really watch how you behave with other people, and always be on with them in a sense. Don't just always smile. I mean, I'm a big smiler, and I think that's good. And I'm a big. Someone came to me and said, you have PMA, and I said, what the hell is PMA? And they said positive mental attitude. And I took that as a huge compliment, because you can tell when someone has PMA. You have PMA, I can tell. And it radiates. And I think that's one of the most important things that people get when they see you. It comes down to Maya Angelou, in a sense, that you make them feel good no matter what you're saying.
Oh, that's a great way to exist, and perfect timing with her on the coin finally. So I think it's fantastic. David, thanks so much for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed this.
Thanks so much.